The armor no one could repair. The Varkhan Empire had conquered hundreds of star systems, crushed rival civilizations, and survived wars that reshaped entire sectors of the galaxy. At the center of that power stood Queen Zareth, the Iron Sovereign. Her enemies feared her fleets. Her allies respected her authority. But everyone feared the armor. Forged thousands of years earlier, the royal armor of the Varkhan queens was more than ceremonial protection. It was a symbol of imperial rule, an ancient masterpiece containing technology so advanced that even modern engineers barely understood it. Every queen inherited it. Every queen protected it. And every queen trusted it with her life. For centuries, it had never failed. Until now, the battle above Karos Prime had been one of the bloodiest conflicts in recent memory. Enemy dreadnoughts filled the void, and entire fleets burned beneath relentless bombardment. Queen Zareth had personally led the assault from the front lines, wearing the royal armor as she always did. She won the battle, but victory came at cost. A concentrated plasma strike hit her command vessel and nearly killed her. The queen survived, but the armor absorbed the full force of the blast. Deep fractures spread across its black metallic surface. Ancient energy conduits shattered. Internal systems that had functioned flawlessly for centuries suddenly went dark. The relic had been wounded, and nobody knew how to heal it. Inside the Imperial Palace, the damaged armor rested upon a massive repair platform surrounded by dozens of engineers. The Empire's finest minds had worked for weeks. Nothing helped. Every repair attempt produced new failures. Every adjustment seemed to break another hidden system. Ancient energy channels refused to stabilize. Diagnostic programs generated contradictory results. Components that should have been simple to replace appeared connected to hundreds of unknown subsystems. Frustration filled the workshop. "It makes no sense," one engineer muttered. "It shouldn't even function." Yet it did for thousands of years. The chief royal engineer stared at the armor with exhausted eyes. Again, the technicians activated another repair sequence. For several seconds, everything seemed normal. Then alarms erupted throughout the chamber. Warning lights flashed red. Another subsystem had failed. Several engineers lowered their heads in defeat. The chief engineer clenched his fists. Weeks of work, thousands of specialists, countless resources, all wasted. The palace doors suddenly opened. Everyone froze. Queen Zareth entered the workshop. The towering alien ruler moved with calm authority despite the obvious irritation in her golden eyes. The room fell silent. She approached the armor. "What progress has been made?" Nobody answered immediately. That alone told her everything. The chief engineer finally stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we continue our efforts." The queen's gaze narrowed. "That was not my question." An uncomfortable silence followed. Finally, the engineer lowered his head. "We have made none." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. For a long moment, nobody moved. Queen Zareth examined the damaged armor resting on the platform. The symbol of her empire, the relic of her ancestors, broken, and surrounded by experts who could not fix it. When she finally spoke, her voice carried enough force to silence every breath in the room. "You command the finest engineers in known space." Nobody dared answer. "You possess resources that entire civilizations could never imagine." Still silence. "And yet my armor remains broken." The queen turned and walked away. "Fix it." The doors closed behind her. The workshop remained frozen long after she left. Far from the imperial capital, on an aging maintenance station orbiting a lonely mining colony, a human mechanic named Ethan Cole sat in a cramped workshop reviewing repair reports. Most people ignored royal news. Ethan did not. He found complicated machines interesting. The reports describing the queen's armor had caught his attention immediately. He studied every available image, every technical note, every engineering assessment. Hours passed. Then something unusual caught his eye. A tiny structural distortion near one damaged section. Everyone focused on the visible fractures. Nobody seemed interested in what had caused them. Ethan leaned closer. The more he examined the reports, the more convinced he became. The engineers were treating the armor like a machine. but it wasn't behaving like one. A slow smile appeared on his face. "That's strange," he whispered. He spent the entire night studying the data. By morning, he had written a detailed repair proposal. When he submitted it to the Imperial Engineering Network, he expected nobody to notice. Instead, 3 days later, an official royal summons arrived at his workshop. Ethan stared at the message in disbelief. The Queen had ordered him brought to the palace. And for the first time in weeks, hope stirred within the Varkhan Empire. The human in the royal workshop. Ethan Cole had repaired mining crawlers buried under landslides. He had rebuilt cargo shuttles that everyone else had declared scrap. Once, he had even restored a century-old atmosphere processor using spare parts and a welding torch. But as his transport descended toward the Imperial Palace, he felt something unfamiliar. Nervousness. The palace stretched across an entire artificial continent suspended above the capital world. Towering black spires pierced the clouds, and countless warships patrolled the skies around it. This was not a place where ordinary mechanics were invited, especially human mechanics. The transport landed inside a massive hangar guarded by armored soldiers. An officer approached immediately. "Ethan Cole, that's me. Follow me." The officer offered no further explanation. Minutes later, Ethan entered the Royal Engineering Complex. The workshop was enormous. Rows of advanced fabrication systems lined the walls. Holographic displays floated above workstations. Hundreds of engineers moved between machines that cost more than entire colonies. At the center of the room stood the damaged armor. Even from a distance, Ethan could feel its presence. The relic looked less like equipment and more like a living monument. Every eye in the workshop turned toward him. The silence was immediate. Then came the whispers. "That's the human. He looks like a maintenance worker." "He is a maintenance worker." A few engineers laughed openly. Ethan ignored them. He had dealt with worse. The chief royal engineer approached with visible irritation. Tall, silver-skinned, and wearing the insignia of imperial authority, he clearly disliked the situation. "You are Ethan Cole?" "Yes." The engineer folded his arms. "You claim you can repair the royal armor." Ethan shook his head. "No." The engineer blinked. "No. I said I think I know what's wrong with it." "That's different." Several nearby engineers exchanged confused looks. The chief engineer frowned. "You traveled across half the empire to tell us that." Ethan smiled slightly. "First, I'd like to actually look at it." The engineer clearly wanted to argue. Instead, he stepped aside. "Very well." Ethan walked toward the armor. The room watched. For several minutes, he simply circled it. No tools, no scanners, no diagnostic equipment, just observation. The engineers grew increasingly irritated. One finally spoke. "What exactly is he doing?" "I think he's pretending to work." More laughter followed. Ethan ignored them. His eyes moved across every fracture, every burn mark, every damaged section. Then he stopped. There, exactly where he expected. A tiny distortion hidden beneath one damaged energy conduit. He crouched for a closer look. His expression changed immediately. "Well, that's a problem." The chief engineer stepped forward. "What is?" Ethan pointed. "This." The engineer examined the area. "It is superficial damage." "No," Ethan replied. "It's the source of everything." The room erupted with objections. "Impossible. We checked that area weeks ago. It isn't connected to the core systems." Ethan stood and looked around. "That's what the diagnostics say." "Because it's true." Ethan crossed his arms. "Then explain why every repair attempt creates new failures." Nobody answered. The chief engineer's face darkened. "You believe we've been repairing the wrong systems? I think you've been treating the armor like a machine." The room fell silent. One engineer laughed. "It is a machine." Ethan shook his head. "No, machines are predictable." He pointed toward the armor. "That thing behaves more like a living ecosystem." The engineer stared at him as though he had lost his mind. The chief engineer spoke carefully. "Explain." Ethan walked around the platform. "Every subsystem depends on dozens of others. Change one thing, and everything reacts." He touched a holographic schematic. "You keep replacing damaged components." "Of course. That's the problem." The chief engineer frowned. Damaged parts should be replaced. Normally, yes. Ethan pointed toward the armor again. But this wasn't built normally. The room became quiet. For the first time, several engineers appeared curious. Ethan continued. Whoever designed this armor expected components to age together. The chief engineer's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that every repair you've made is introducing mismatched parts into a system designed for balance. A long silence followed. No one wanted to admit it, but the theory explained nearly every failure. The chief engineer slowly looked toward the armor, then back at Ethan. What would you do differently? Ethan smiled. First, I'd stop trying to force it to work. The room waited. Then I'd listen. The chief engineer sighed heavily. That's not an engineering strategy. Ethan grinned. It is if you want this thing alive again. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, unexpectedly, a voice echoed through the workshop. Proceed. Everyone turned. Queen Zareth stood in the doorway. The entire room immediately bowed. The queen's golden eyes remained fixed on Ethan. You have challenged every expert in my empire. Ethan nodded. Looks that way. A few engineers nearly fainted at his casual tone. The queen stepped closer to the armor. Can you repair it? Ethan looked at the damaged relic. For the first time, he allowed himself complete honesty. I don't know. The room tensed. But I know why it's broken. The queen considered that answer. Then she nodded once. Begin. As engineers hurried to obey, Ethan approached the armor again. The challenge had officially begun. And somewhere deep inside the ancient relic, systems that had slept for centuries seemed to be waiting for him to make the first move. The Queen's question. For 6 days and 6 nights, the Royal Engineering Complex barely slept. Engineers rotated through shifts. Technicians monitored every power fluctuation. Security teams guarded the workshop around the clock. At the center of it all stood Ethan Cole. To the frustration of nearly everyone present, he spent more time taking things apart than repairing them. The chief engineer nearly suffered a nervous breakdown on the second day. You removed a royal energy regulator. Yes. You disconnected 3 primary conduits. Yes. You disabled half the armor's defensive systems. Ethan looked up from his workbench. They were already disabled. The engineer opened his mouth, then closed it again. Unfortunately, the human had a point. By the 4th day, something strange began happening. The armor stopped fighting them. For weeks, every repair attempt had triggered new failures. Now system stability was gradually increasing. Power fluctuations were decreasing. Diagnostic errors were disappearing. Nobody could explain it, except Ethan. You were trying to repair symptoms, he said. The real damage was deeper. The chief engineer hated that explanation, mostly because it was proving correct. On the 6th day, the workshop filled with nervous anticipation. The final components were being reinstalled. Ancient power channels glowed softly beneath the armor's black surface. For the first time since the Battle of Karos Prime, the relic looked whole again. Ethan stepped back. Well, he said, let's find out. The room became silent. A technician activated the start of sequence. Nothing happened. Several engineers exchanged worried looks. Then a low hum echoed through the chamber. Energy flowed through the armor. Golden lines illuminated across its surface. One system activated, then another, and another. The workshop lights flickered as enormous power reserves awakened. The armor stood motionless for several seconds. Then every display in the room lit up green. No warnings, no errors, no failures. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the entire workshop erupted. Engineers shouted. Technicians cheered. Several exhausted specialists nearly collapsed from relief. The chief engineer stared at the displays in disbelief. It works. Nobody corrected him. Because it did. For the first time in weeks, the royal armor was fully operational. An emergency message was immediately sent to the palace. The queen had to know. Less than an hour later, the massive doors of the workshop opened. Silence swept through the chamber. Queen Zareth entered surrounded by royal guards. She wore ceremonial battle attire. but her repaired armor rested upon her shoulders once more. The sight was breathtaking. Golden energy coursed beneath the dark metal. Ancient systems moved with effortless precision. The relic looked stronger than it had before the battle. Even the engineers who had worked on it for years were stunned. The queen flexed her hand. The armor responded instantly. A faint energy field shimmered around her. Perfect. For several moments, she simply stood there, testing, feeling, listening. Then she turned toward the gathered engineers. Her voice thundered across the workshop. "Who fixed my armor?" The room froze. Every engineer suddenly found the floor extremely interesting. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Everyone knew how dangerous royal attention could be. The queen repeated herself. "Who repaired it?" Silence. Then from the back of the crowd, a single hand rose. Ethan, the human mechanic, stepped forward. "I did." Several engineers winced. Others expected guards to arrest him immediately. Instead, Queen Zareth simply stared. "You?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The queen slowly approached. Her armored footsteps echoed throughout the chamber. When she finally stopped in front of him, she was nearly a head taller. "Ow!" The question surprised everyone, including Ethan. "Ow!" "Yes." The queen placed one gauntlet hand against the armor. "My greatest engineers failed." She looked around the room. They possessed knowledge beyond most civilizations. Then her eyes returned to Ethan. "You repaired what they could not." Ethan considered the question, then shrugged. "I listened." Confusion spread across the workshop. The queen narrowed her eyes. "Explain." Ethan pointed toward the armor. "Everyone treated it like equipment." "Because it is." "Not entirely." The queen remained silent. Ethan continued. "The armor was designed as a complete system." He gestured toward the internal structure displayed on nearby holograms. "Every part depends on every other part." The chief engineer slowly nodded. He hated admitting it, but Ethan was right. If one section changes, Ethan said, everything changes. The queen studied him carefully. "So you repaired the relationships between the components." Ethan smiled. "Exactly." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then an alert suddenly appeared on one of the workshop displays. A technician frowned. "That's strange." Another engineer looked up. "What is it?" The technician's eyes widened. "There's data hidden inside the armor." The room immediately became silent. "Hidden data?" The queen turned sharply. "Show me." Ancient archives began appearing across the holographic displays. Records, blueprints, construction logs. Some are thousands of years old. Many had never been accessed. Then a symbol appeared. A symbol nobody expected. Human. The room froze. The chief engineer stared at the display. "No." Another engineer checked the data. Then checked again. "It's authentic." The queen's eyes narrowed. "What am I looking at?" A technician swallowed nervously. "These records suggest." He hesitated. The entire workshop waited. "These records suggest the original architects of the armor worked alongside human engineers." Shock swept through the room. Humans? Thousands of years ago. Impossible. And yet the data was undeniable. Ethan stared at the display as much as everyone else. Even he had not expected this. The queen looked at the ancient records, then at the human mechanic standing before her. Suddenly everything made sense. Why he understood the armor. Why he saw what others missed. Why he succeeded. The armor had been speaking a language nobody else recognized. A language humanity had never completely forgotten. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, powerful figures within the empire were already learning the truth. A truth many would do anything to bury. Because the human mechanic had not merely repaired the queen's armor. He had uncovered a secret capable of changing the entire galaxy. The mechanic who changed an empire. 3 days after the discovery, the Varkhan Empire was in turmoil. The ancient records hidden inside the royal armor had spread through the highest levels of government. Historians were stunned. Military leaders demanded answers. Political factions accused one another of fabricating evidence. But the facts refused to disappear. Thousands of years earlier, when the empire was still young, human explorers and Varkhan scientists had worked together on several revolutionary technologies. Among those projects was the royal armor itself. Somehow, that history had been erased, and now Ethan Cole had accidentally uncovered it. Not everyone was pleased. Inside the shadows of the Imperial Senate, powerful officials feared what the revelation might mean. For generations, they had portrayed humanity as useful workers and mechanics, but nothing more. If the galaxy learned humans had helped create one of the Empire's greatest treasures, old political narratives would collapse overnight. So they made a decision. The truth had to be buried, and anyone connected to it had to disappear. The annual Imperial Victory Ceremony arrived under heavy security. Millions watched across thousands of worlds as Queen Zareth appeared before the capital's grand military plaza. Warships hovered overhead. Soldiers stood in perfect formation. The restored royal armor gleamed beneath the sunlight. The crowd roared with approval. From a viewing platform near the stage, Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He still wasn't used to royal events. The Queen had offered him a place of honor. He would have preferred his workshop. The ceremony began normally. Military commanders delivered speeches. Veterans received awards. The Queen addressed the Empire. Then everything changed. An explosion ripped through the plaza. The shockwave shattered windows. Panic erupted instantly. A second blast struck a nearby observation tower. Screams filled the air. "Protect the Queen!" Royal guards rushed into formation. Hidden attackers emerged from within the crowd. Energy weapons opened fire. The assassination attempt had begun. Chaos spread across the plaza. The conspirators had planned carefully. They targeted communications systems first, then security networks, then the Queen herself. A barrage of plasma fire raced toward the royal platform. For a split second, it looked unavoidable. Then the armor reacted. Golden energy exploded outward. A massive defensive shield formed around Queen Zareth. The incoming attack struck the barrier and vanished harmlessly. The crowd stared in disbelief. The armor was doing something it had never done before. Ancient systems long believed inactive had awakened. Systems Ethan's repairs had unknowingly restored. The Queen immediately took command. "Secure the civilians." Her voice thundered across the battlefield. "Capture the attackers alive." The armor amplified every word. Soldiers instantly obeyed. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed something unusual. The attackers weren't behaving like professionals. They kept moving toward specific maintenance access points throughout the plaza. His mechanic instincts activated immediately. Those access points connected to the city's infrastructure network. If the attackers gained control, they could disable power grids, transportation systems, and defense platforms. The attack wasn't merely an assassination attempt. It was a coup. Ethan sprinted toward the nearest maintenance terminal. A guard shouted after him, "Where are you going?" "Fixing the problem." The guard had no idea what that meant. Neither did Ethan, but he ran anyway. Inside an underground service corridor, Ethan reached a control station. The network displays confirmed his fears. Unauthorized commands were spreading through the system. The conspirators were preparing to seize control of the capital. Most people would have needed advanced military training to stop them. Ethan only needed engineering experience. For years, he had repaired outdated colony infrastructure. Compared to that, this network was surprisingly familiar. His fingers flew across the controls. He rerouted power, blocked access channels, created false network paths. The attackers suddenly found themselves locked out of critical systems. Confusion spread through their ranks. Their carefully coordinated operation began falling apart. Within minutes, security forces regained control. One by one, the conspirators were captured. The coup collapsed. Hours later, the plaza was secure. The surviving attackers were arrested. Evidence quickly revealed the truth. Several high-ranking political figures had organized the entire operation. Their goal had been simple: kill the Queen, destroy the records, silence Ethan Cole. Instead, they had exposed themselves. That evening, Queen Zareth summoned Ethan to the palace. The royal throne room was unusually quiet. The Queen stood beside a massive window overlooking the capital city. "You saved more than my life today." Ethan shrugged. "I mostly fixed some network problems." A rare smile appeared on the Queen's face. Your species always says things like that. Ethan laughed. Occupational habit. The Queen turned toward him. The Empire owes you a debt. She raised a ceremonial document. I wish to grant you the title of Imperial Chief Engineer. The room became silent. For most citizens, such an honor would represent the achievement of a lifetime. Ethan considered it carefully, then shook his head. The royal advisors gasped. The Queen blinked. You refuse? Respectfully, yes. The advisors looked horrified. The Queen looked curious. Why? Ethan smiled. Because somebody still has to repair broken machines. For a moment, the Queen simply stared. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed. A genuine laugh. The advisors looked shocked. Most had never heard it before. Months later, the story spread across the galaxy. The assassination attempt became history. The hidden records transformed relations between humans and the Varkhan Empire. Old prejudices weakened. New partnerships formed. Human engineers found themselves welcomed across worlds that had once dismissed them. And in a small workshop far from the capital, Ethan Cole returned to the life he preferred. Repairing equipment, solving problems, helping people, exactly as before. Only now, the entire galaxy knew his name. Because the most powerful armor in existence had not been saved by an emperor, a scientist, or a fleet admiral. It had been saved by a single human mechanic. A mechanic who looked at an impossible problem, listened carefully, and fixed what everyone else thought was beyond repair. And that, more than any weapon or warship, was humanity's greatest strength. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe to my channel to see more interesting stories like this.